Welcome to our fourth video on this channel. Let's begin with a disclaimer, as we're going to deal with matters that relate to physics, chemistry, and so forth. I have no degree in any of those natural sciences. My scientific background is such that I have an MA degree in linguistics and psychology and a BA degree in Bible studies. Some people might hold that against me now because I broach matters that are outside my scope of expertise. I beg to disagree with those people. As a trained scientist, I do understand how science works and can, for instance, differentiate between assumption and facts, flimsy and conclusive evidence, and observable science and non-observable science. I also understand the significance of true science, which clearly states its worldview and is at the same time willing to go where the data lead. As long as a scientist comes with an open mind and open hands, the data will be interpreted within that framework, which has the greatest explanatory power. In passing, this week I've also had a conversation with a trained pharmacist who is also a believer in Jesus. I asked him how important science was for supporting his faith. Here's what he said: "I really don't need any science to assure me of the truth of Jesus." Why? Because I have personally encountered the truth of Jesus. Now, with this in mind, my friend, I do want to underscore the importance, no, even the necessity of experientially meeting Jesus. Even the best evidence cannot give you that. You have to get to know Jesus yourself. In my third video, I showed you that faith and science are compatible. To many, this seems to be an unheard of statement these days. May I remind you of the fact that not too long ago, no such statement had to be made, because it was more than evident. Case in point, Max Planck, the German scientist who won the 1918 Nobel Prize in Physics for his revolutionary work on the establishment and development of the theory of elementary quanta. In his 1932 book, Where's Science Going?, he said, "There can never be any real opposition between religion and science, for the one is the complement of the other." Now let's look at today's agenda. We're dealing with the question if there is enough and reasonable proof for the creation of the world by God instead of just mere chance, that is, randomness. A larger question, of course, is the one if God even exists. This question will be answered as we go. Not only in this video, of course, but also in future videos. Today, I'm just going to give you a very clear reason to say yes from a creationist perspective. This is part 1 of this particular teaching, Creation versus Evolution. Feel free to join me in part 2 in my very next video on this channel of Loving Truth. Most people in the West, many scientists included, unquestioningly hold to the theory of evolution, which states that the world came about randomly by natural processes over a very long period of time in the area of a couple of billion years. Or to put it in the words of Dr. John Rankin, PhD in mathematical physics, this is the current belief of evolution theory: that an initially homogeneous and uninteresting universe became differentiated over billions of years into the complex and beautiful structure of interrelated objects that we know and see today. Rest assured, though, that there are enough scientists around who have not only challenged this assumption, but actually shredded it in light of the evidence. The line of scientists that support creation over evolutionism is long and can be traced back right to the beginnings of modern-day science as we know it. Of course, science has advanced a great deal since then, and yet some of the brightest minds in today's scientific community still firmly hold on to the biblical framework of creation instead of buying into evolutionism. I gave you a couple of examples the last time. And this book here, for example, in 6 days, is a fantastic book to read. And I'll quote from it a lot also in this video. By the way, there are a couple more, of course, that you might want to check out. There's Dr. Jonathan Feng, Professor of Physics and Astronomy at the University of California, Irvine. There's Professor Rosalind Picard, founder and director of the Effective Computing Research Group at the MIT Media Lab. And then there's also, for example, Dr. Ian H. Hutchinson, Professor of Nuclear Science and Engineering at the MIT, and so on. You might also want to watch a short clip entitled 10 Top Christian Scientists on Science and Faith. You see the description, which is actually a bit of an appetizer into why some modern-day top scientists believe in creation. In passing, in one of the next videos, I'm going to also deal with the question why there are so many scientists that still hold on to evolutionism, although this model is certainly not scientific, to put it in the words of Professor Edward Boudreau, PhD in theoretical chemistry. Many others, my friend, agree. Professor Dr. John Simbala, PhD in mechanical engineering, for instance, categorically states, and now listen to this, the theory of evolution has no legitimate factual evidence. Dr. A.J. White, PhD in physical chemistry, is even more outspoken. He says, there is not a shred of evidence for the evolution of life on Earth. In passing, Dr. White, at his own admission, became a creationist as a result of reading about evolution. So much, my friend, speaks for the biblical account of creation, even young Earth creation, based on the data and facts we gather from all sorts of areas of research. Today, we will focus only on two, information science and also dating methods. Now, one thing I still need to add though, the question if the world around us evolved or was created is no small matter. If you're a born-again believer in Jesus Christ, this question is foundational. It is not a side issue. A born-again believer cannot embrace evolutionism because it goes against everything the Bible teaches. Now, there are a lot of believers out there who have never done their homework and therefore don't know about the importance of this question. Well, may our video series serve them to understand the issue better and to defend and teach it correctly. Now, let us look at two powerful pieces of evidence. The first one comes from the area of information science. According to John Baumgartner, PhD in geophysics, one of the most dramatic discoveries in biology in the 20th century is that, quote, living organisms are realizations of coded language structures. All the detailed chemical and structural complexity associated with the metabolism, repair, specialized function, and reproduction of each living cell is a realization of the coded algorithms stored in its DNA, unquote. So here's the question to kick things off. If life is the result of a random combination of chance plus time plus energy plus matter, how, again, in the words of Dr. Baumgartner, do such extremely large structures arise? Well, from my own background as a linguist, I know that the language comes, among others, with vocabulary and very complex grammatical rules, and is independent of its material carrier. You can put language on a slide or a USB or anything else, and the linguistic code will still be there. Now here's an illustration. When we look at this book, we see the material properties of it. We see the paper, we see the ink, and so forth. What we cannot see, though, is the ideas of the book. These ideas are not limited to the makeup of the transmitter. I could equally well put it on a different physical carrier. This fact, by the way, also posed a problem for Einstein, who could not identify any means by which meaning could be bestowed to symbols. A problem known in linguistics as Einstein's gulf. That means a logically unbridgeable gap that separates the physical world from the conceptual one. Professor John Aller, PhD in linguistics, has shown in his work that language and language-like systems underlie the architecture of the human brain, as well as the genetic systems involved in biochemistry, detoxification, immune defenses, and repairs. Well, very obviously then, the symbolic information at hand is distinct from matter and energy. Dr. Baumgartner concludes that, quote, its reality is qualitatively different from the matter-energy substrate on which the linguistic information rides, unquote. My friend, can you see what this means? It means that a worldview that is built on materialism only, with total disregard of these facts, is unable to describe, let alone explain the origins of life correctly. Now, I fully agree with Dr. Baumgartner when he says it is amazing that its falsification is so trivial. Rejecting the scientific nonsense of materialism calls for a better worldview. Creationism provides just that, when it confidently states that the origin of such complex, non-material structures is an intelligent creator. Why so? Well, simply because information requires a source and cannot be defined in physical or chemical terms. Anyone can easily see that the origin of life cannot be explained by materialism. Even non-Christian scientists must agree. Let's hear the scientists, Max Planck, once again. There's a conscious, intelligent mind or spirit. This is the very origin of all matter. Professor McIntosh, PhD in mathematics, leaves no room for where he stands in the debate. Quote, information, that is the setting of rules, the language, code, etc., has been there from the beginning. To argue that this came by chance is scientifically preposterous. Unquote. Information scientist Werner Gitt, Professor Werner Gitt, made this abundantly clear in his groundbreaking publication called In the Beginning Was Information. He writes, quote, information can only exist if it has had a mental source, unquote. So, the mental, non-physical source is missing. The evolutionary framework just doesn't have it, period. And what about randomness? Remember, evolutionism states that everything ultimately comes about by chance. We don't need to be biologists to see that the human is so much more complex than, say, a mouse. So can random changes to information, as evolutionism states, ever increase the complexity, the functionality of a genetic program? The answer is no, no, no. Don Batten, PhD in plant physiology, sums up the findings of numerous studies that have dealt with this question. Quote, mutations cause loss of information, loss of functional complexity, not an increase as evolution requires. Unquote. In a nutshell then, life does not progress upwards through evolution. Let us now turn to a second piece of evidence that so clearly speaks against evolutionism. This concerns the issue of dating methods. Obviously, there's a huge difference whether you date the Earth to be a few thousand years old or a couple of millions or even billions of years, as evolutionists assert. So let's get an understanding of the numbers involved here first, because quite frankly, none of us can even begin to imagine what these astronomically high numbers mean. For this, I use a simple illustration. Okay, 1,000 seconds is about 16 minutes. 1,000,000 seconds is about 11 and a half days. And how about 1,000,000,000 seconds? Well, 1,000,000,000 seconds is about 31 and a half years. So, to jump from thousands to millions is already quite a leap. But if you seriously want to make that transition to billions, you'd better be sure you know what you're talking about. Well, do evolutionists know what they're talking about? I don't think so. Dr. Russell Humphreys, PhD in physics, started out as a secular, non-believing scientist. He was surprised at what he discovered once he began to investigate the various dating methods. I'll give you his own words as transcribed from a video entitled Evidence for a Young World. You'll see it in the description. Quote, most dating methods give you a young world. There's maybe over 100 different ways you could estimate the age of the world from science. 90% of these methods give you a world much younger than billions of years, and only 10% of the methods give you a world that, at first glance, appears to be billions of years old. And the 10% methods, the old ones, are the ones you have heard about. Radioisotope dating and carbon-14 dating, how long it takes light from distant galaxies to get here. End of quote. Radiometric dating, for example, is not just an older method, but leads to wrong data. Let me show you. Does anyone remember the year 1980? Well, that was the year when a very significant volcanic eruption occurred at Mount St. Helens, which can be found in the state of Washington, USA. According to Dr. Holroyd, PhD in meteorology, radiometric dating puts the lava of that outbreak, listen to this, at 1⅓ to 3 million years, whereas in reality it is not even 40 years old. Hold on, my friend. Some 40 years versus 1 or 2 or even 3 million years? Remember the little illustration at the beginning. What are 1,000 seconds compared to 1,000,000 or even 1,000,000,000? Clearly, the difference between 40 years and over 1,000,000 is something I would expect a so-called scientific method to confidently resolve. Now, we need to do some true science here instead of coming up with absurd calculations, simply because evolutionism demands it. Dr. White's research, I quoted him early in the video, fully supports my statement. He says, quote, people believe in evolution because they choose to do so. It has nothing to do, no, he even says it has nothing at all to do with evidence. Another telling example comes from Professor Wanzer, PhD in physics. He says, quote, an example of a supposed fact demonstrating an ancient age of the Earth is the rate of growth of stalactites and stalagmites in limestone caverns. As a boy, I toured Carlsbad caverns in New Mexico. And remember the tour guide informing us, matter-of-factly, that the limestone caverns and formations were formed over many millions of years, which did not seem to agree with what I had been taught in Sunday school. The sign above the entrance until 1988 said the caverns were at least 260 million years old. 260 million years. In recent years, the age on the sign was reduced to 7 to 10 million years, then 2 million years, and now the sign is gone, perhaps the result of observations that stalactite growth rates of several inches a month are common. Much, my friend, could be said about the 90% methods. That is, the majority of all dating methods that uncompromisingly point to a young Earth of about 6,000 years, give or take, in total. Yes, you heard right, my friend. Roughly 6,000 years. Please watch Dr. Humphrey's video for starters if you want additional evidence. I like the way Dr. Paul Geim, PhD in medical research, puts it. He has thoroughly investigated the methods of radiometric dating. Here's what he has to say, quote, Genesis 1 to 9 is not just myth, but an account of what actually happened. I arrived at that conclusion by following the data. I'm not afraid of further data. I welcome challenges and actually look for them. I believe that if we do our homework carefully enough and without succumbing to bias, we will find that the book, including a literal 6-day creation, will stand. When properly understood, nature testifies to the trustworthiness of God's Word. Do you remember our opening question? I asked, is there enough and reasonable proof for the creation of the world by God? The aspects we've looked at today, both information science and dating methods, give us a clear answer. Life could not have come about by chance, by matter and energy only. Instead, life requires information and a source for it. The biblical worldview is fully compatible with the data and interprets them correctly. The dating methods evolutionism holds on to lead to false results and cannot be considered true science. The majority of all dating methods show that life occurred on a much shorter time scale. This again is fully compatible with what the Bible teaches. As a believer in Jesus, I did not have to commit intellectual suicide, but find that faith and science are in perfect harmony, as stated initially. Remember our 3 tests of truth from our first and second video? The evidence presented both from information science and the field of dating methods concerning logical consistency and empirical adequacy is clear. The evolutionary worldview cannot account for the data sufficiently, why not even correctly. Therefore, we must reject it. In my next video, I will add some more evidence for the creation of life. Make sure you will educate yourself so that you are equipped to understand, apply, defend, and teach the great truth of the Word of God. My friend, take these matters very seriously because our very belief depends on it. By the grace of God, we'll continue on this channel in 2 weeks from now.